program Charles Moskowitz here. I finally figured everything out, Mike, in terms of the technicalities of this, which are wonderful when you can do them. But
It's always good when it works.
yeah, I mean, but here it is. It's working. And I just want to make sure I'm signed into Skype in case we get any calls. Yep, there we are. We're at Skype. We can take calls, by the way. 508 637 5596. 508 637 5596. I wonder if I should take the ultimate risk and go live on TikTok, which is a place where I'm generally not welcomed, but I'm going to do it. Yeah, we're live on TikTok. Welcome aboard TikTok.
For now.
Yeah, for now, until they shut it off. But here we are. Mike, I wanted to talk a little bit today about the two cases, of course, that are in the news, where in both cases someone ended up dead. And in both cases, two individuals were charged with the crime. And that is the case of Luigi Mangione and the insurance man, and also the case of Daniel Penny on the subway in New York. These things seem to have coincided in terms of Daniel Penny's case being dismissed and Mangione being caught at a McDonald's in Pennsylvania. And I think that there's an element
to. Hang on, Trey. It wasn't dismissed. He was acquitted.
He was acquitted, exactly. Thank you.
Yeah.
Now, I want to just comment on each of them. On the first one, the case of Daniel Penny, this is an example of how critical race theory has taken over the minds of this country, at least the elite minds, the legal minds, the high ground. And in that everything comes down to race. Race had absolutely nothing to do with it. I mean, this guy was dangerous. He was wielding a knife. He was threatening to attack people. He had a long record of extreme violence. He was not sane. And Daniel Penny, being a Marine off duty, conducted a function by which he subdued him and saved a lot of lives in that subway, according to everyone who was there.
Well, not only that, there was at least one black passenger that helped Daniel Penny subdue the guy.
Right.
So race wasn't involved in this at all.
No, I mean, and it just happened to be a coincidence that the guy happened to be black. It had nothing to do with anything. But the fact that it was made into an issue and then it was brought to court, which it never should have been. And then you had this radical leftist attorney trying to put Daniel Penny in prison for life. I mean, or put him in, charge him with manslaughter, shows how out of whack our system has become. This guy ordinarily would be hailed as a hero, which he is. He saved lives by stopping this person from going on a violent attack. And just the twisted means by which our society now looks at these things. Everything has to be looked at through a prism of race, and everything in that context has to be looked at through the phenomena of anyone who is, in this case, a white man, is naturally seen as the oppressor, and anyone who isn't is seen as the victim.
Yeah.
And
let me just add this, though, that I'm not sure that, quote, society feels this way. I think that it is true and very unfortunate that the institutions have become dominated by these lunatics, including this ugly, angry lesbian prosecutor. Yes. Is there any other type of lesbian other than angry? I don't know.
Well, let's just say that they tend to, I mean, I with due respect, I don't want to get shut down on TikTok here, but let's just say that there's something twisted going on there.
Yeah, well, okay. So she also went viral for a case where she felt sorry for a murderer and reduced his sentence because he'd had a hard life. But I guess don't confuse the way society at large is reacting to something with the very, very unfortunate fact that these evil lunatics tend toward these kind of jobs.
No, I think that society at large views Daniel Perry not only as a hero, but as someone who stood up and took, like an ordinary situation where you would protect people's lives. I mean, I think that most New Yorkers, including most liberals, think of that, think this way. It's just this radical establishment, the very people that President Trump won against, who have become so twisted that they think there's some virtue in this kind of a bizarre and inverted outlook that would lead to prosecuting this man for.
I think what helped is that, and maybe we can use this as a sort of BCAD kind of thing, before COVID, after COVID, all right? I think there were a lot of people who for their whole lives have been brainwashed into the idea that their betters know the way things should be. But that
Mhm.
forever lost all credibility with how the experts handled COVID. So when it came to this case
Yeah.
of Daniel Penny, the elite were trying to say, well, it's terrible. He shouldn't have put the chokehold on the guy for that long, and so on and so forth. Didn't hold, didn't wash this time.
No.
And that, I think, is one of the reasons that Trump won, that the elites are out of control. The same thing with the movie industry, everything else. All these institutions are falling apart because people aren't buying the lie anymore.
That's right. And now I think because of this acquittal, it's time to revisit the case of Darren Chauvin, Derek
Yeah,
Chauvin, who also basically was putting this man in a hold that he had been trained to do as a police officer in Minnesota, and that they had undergone training to do that procedure. Now, maybe they shouldn't have been doing it, but that was what he was trained to do. It had been done many times before, and that he did it because this man was resisting arrest. He refused to get out of the car, and he was behaving in what all observers said appeared to be violently. The fact that he died is something that they could not have foreseen. The man was on fentanyl and he was on other drugs they found in his system. Then he had an enlarged heart, and yet this became another one of these successes for this leftist establishment that then ginned up this case with somehow the fact that he happened to be black had anything to do with it, which it didn't, and that it was he became like a symbol of all of the situations historically, which are real, where black men were attacked, yes. But this particular case, it didn't really add up to that. It became more kind of an archetype of something else. And that's sort of how they use the legal system in a way.
well, yeah. What happened here was, and there were a few people that spoke out at the time. Not only was this guy a career criminal, uh, but he was raised up to be some sort of secular saint. So I think they overplayed their hand, but the establishment in Minneapolis felt that they were trapped into going along with the crowd, uh, much the way, I suppose, because it's almost Christmas, you could argue that to some extent Pontius Pilate maybe was kind of railroaded into going along uh, with the crowd and so on,
Right.
uh, rather than doing his job. So the good news is that when they tried to gin up a BLM type situation on this Daniel Penny, it didn't work. It didn't work.
No, it didn't work, and it backfired on them. And just not to get off on on a topic, but I view Pilate as having been part of the deep state in his day,
Oh
and
yeah,
that in the case of Chauvin, you had the deep state putting on kente cloth and bowing in the Capitol. Remember that with
yeah.
Pelosi, and then you had them launching these what I would describe as a Kristallnacht against Black communities in major cities where businesses were looted, houses and businesses were burned, and people were shot to death in response. Almost in a coordinated way, while the media, while filming the fires, was saying this is a mostly peaceful
Mostly peaceful.
protest. Yeah. But I also want to talk about Mangione because there are certain conspiracy theories around this,
No good.
and I have no idea about any of them. Who knows the truth about it? But I think there are a couple that are
And you
worth
never
listening.
will know the truth, by the way.
Probably
Any
not.
high-profile shooting, no.
There's some very strange things around it, but there is social benefit in examining certain aspects of this, and one of them, and again, and I am not in any way in favor of this insurance man getting gunned down like that, of course. But it did bring up some issues about what's happening in insurance. That Brian Thompson probably in accord, and you know something about this, Mike,
Yeah.
with other insurance companies over the past maybe 3 or 4 years, maybe since Biden took office, I don't know, maybe earlier, they had consolidated and become so huge that they were in a position to deny benefits to people who may otherwise have gotten benefits. And these are people who had paid into that system for decades and who, owed that system. Now, I'm speaking here as somebody who actually got a life and health insurance license. So I know something about this. And I remember being in the office when I was trying to sell those policies. I was terrible at it. I didn't last long. But I remember my supervisor there on the phone with this poor man who had bought an extended policy. I'm not going to mention the company, but like an advanced policy for cancer, and he was calling because he had cancer.
Yeah.
And my supervisor was saying, "Sorry, we're not going to cover that because it was on this day and not on that day, because it's this kind of cancer, not that kind of cancer." And I was listening to this, and that conversation made my blood curdle. It was really, really brutal. Now, I can understand where people get very hot under the collar in these matters. I think in the case of Luigi, I don't know what the truth of it is, but my understanding is that his mother had some kind of a disease and they thought that was covered by insurance and they were not getting the coverage. And that since this massive consolidation on the part of major insurance companies, people are not getting the coverage that they previously got, and many of them are dying. They finally get approved for a drug or they get approved for a procedure, and it's too late.
Yeah.
The additional aspect to this that I think should be considered is that in recent years, insurance companies and other major companies are switching to artificial intelligence to make decisions. I think this is an aspect that needs to be examined. I'm not in any way an expert about it. I was listening to Joe Allen talk about this. He's the author of Aeon. He's been a guest of mine. He's a regular with Steve Bannon. And he pointed out that, like, for example, recently there was a case where someone was being denied coverage while they were in the middle of anesthesia, right? The insurance company, oh, we don't cover this. And it was a decision that was not made by a person. It was done through these algorithms, the same algorithms that, by the way, not to go into this, but deal with voting machines, but we won't talk about that, right? I mean, it looks at averages and it looks at the mean and the standard deviation, and then it makes an estimate. And it's not really a person in charge of it. And the result is that more and more people are being denied coverage that they paid for, or that they at least thought they had, and that ultimately they get when it's too late. So he's expressing a rage over that is actually a real issue. Now, obviously, he shouldn't have taken it out on this man, shooting him in the back in cold blood. However, it is a cry that does resonate with people. And the other factor with regard to Brian Thompson is that he had been making tens of millions of dollars more than anyone had made in recent years in that industry, and he's not the only one. And I think that I'm a small government guy. However, with insurance particularly, there is and there was pretty significant regulation over these sorts of things. There certainly is regulation in terms of them having to have a reserve account to cover policies and a reinsurer and that sort of thing. But I think there was regulation around these sort of mega consolidations and massive salary increases, which is taken out of the funds that they're earning, and that gives an incentive to deny policies when they may not have otherwise been denied. What do you think?
All right. It's interesting that it happened in the case of United. As a small business owner back in the day, United was one of the very first companies as a private insurer to offer these products. And ironically, when they first started, they were one of the best. But then I guess someone decided, well, we can make more money if we start denying some claims. And that's exactly what happened.
Right.
And we changed carriers. But the other sort of theoretical problem is the nature of the business of insurance. All right. Most people deal in business with some sort of tangible product or service. When you're in banking, you really don't have a product. You're renting money, okay? But it's pretty established what you do and what you can't do.
Mm-hmm.
The nature of insurance is interesting because it deals only in what we call claims, all right? So imagine that I have this big pot of money. You have to come to me and prove to me that you have a claim on my money, all right? So even though I've paid in, I have to beg you to get my claim, all right? By the very nature of how that works, it's always going to be a struggle, especially when it's not so tangible as I need to repair the fender on my car or my house burned down or something like that. So the other problem with healthcare is it's so screwed up in so many ways that they can take advantage of it. And it's very interesting that today was my very first medical appointment with my primary care doctor who just became a concierge doctor. And the main reason was insurance makes private practice as a primary care doctor impossible.
Right.
There's no model for it anymore, other than you spend 5 minutes with the patient and try
And
to
then,
get.
and then yet the doctor sits there looking at a computer screen rather than looking at his patient.
Yeah. And she didn't want that anymore. And there you go. So everybody hates insurance companies. And I told her a story which had to do with many of your audience members remember back in the, I think, 70s and 80s, there were a lot of TV commercials about like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
Yeah.
And they would focus on the State Farm agent in some very small town somewhere,
Right.
who is the State Farm agent in that town, right? So it ended up that there was actually a case of the State Farm agent in some little town in North Carolina driving down the road, and he sees one of his policyholders pulled off to the side of the road, changing a tire or something, an older guy. So the agent stops, helps the guy, and as he's walking back to his own car, he gets hit by a truck and gets killed instantly.
Oh.
He had his life insurance through State Farm, and the benefit was denied because him working on the side of the road was not part of his normal occupation. This thing went up to the North Carolina Supreme Court, and they eventually paid it. But the sad part of that was, look at the mentality. This isn't just some guy. This is your like a good neighbor guy, and you still deny it. That's the mentality.
Right. They have an incentive to deny. And yet, I don't know. I don't know if you can answer this, and it's kind of a paradoxical situation. But you have drugs that are very expensive.
Yeah,
And I particularly would note some of these injectables that are becoming very popular, like Ozempic
yeah.
and
Anything.
Wegovy and all of them. And they cost thousands of dollars, and yet the insurance company is happy to cover that. And so it's out of pocket for the consumer, like just a copay of whatever, $50. How does the insurance company, I mean, aren't they losing on that? I mean, why are they doing that?
Well, you don't know exactly what the reimbursement is. Okay. You
But you
start,
know that everyone's making a buck on that. I mean, the
yeah,
drug
you
company,
start understanding that when you go to the hospital and they have an itemized bill and some service, let's say, is $31,000 and the insurance company pays $2,000 and that settles it, then you get some idea of how this pricing works.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, but doesn't the insurance company have an incentive to not cover these drugs? Because, I mean, how are they making money from that?
I think the theory is that it's the flavor of the month, and maybe this one they're going to take it on the chin, because look how good we are. We're
Yeah, but
paying
then
for
you can say that about a lot of things. Like, for example, I recently read that the industry of doing sex change operations for children is like billions of dollars. Who is covering those costs? Not the people that are doing the sex, the family or the paying for their child. God forbid anybody does that. But I'm just saying that this is a huge boon
Well,
to
there's
some.
all kinds of things in the background. There's foundations that are created by rich lunatics.
Right.
Uh, there is money involved in how the surgeons are paid, which surgeons, how high profile it is, how much PR they get, how much money comes in from other sources.
Well,
It,
somebody's making a pretty good penny on that, and there's that's all. I get the sense that that entire thing, besides having a political and social aspect, is all about money. I mean, there's
well, of
huge,
course.
usually these hospitals are making a great, and then of course that even brings up the bigger issue, which is COVID. How did they make money? I mean, hospitals made money every time that they called a case COVID. If somebody went to the hospital with a broken arm and they tested positive for COVID, they call it a COVID case and get money for that. Who was paying that? I mean, in that case, I think the government was paying the money.
Yeah. Now, you have to understand when you get into complicated issues, it's very difficult to figure out where the money's coming from. Let me give you a real prosaic example. Many years ago, I had a good friend that owned a car dealership. All right. Long story short, no one knows the dealer cost of any car. Why do I say that? Because there's an arm length list of incentives that the dealer gets at any time. Okay. So factory invoice doesn't mean anything. He could be getting another $2,000 for selling that car because for some reason the factory wants to move it. So imagine now in a situation as complicated as healthcare and as corrupt as healthcare. I mean, I wrote an article on this many years ago. They
Right.
estimate that 40% of the money spent on healthcare is fraud.
Well, yeah,
So,
but in the case of purchasing a car, you do pay for that. I mean, I owned I had to take a loan.
no. Well, what I'm saying, Chuck, is you pay for it, and it might be below quote unquote dealer's cost, but nobody knows what dealer's cost is.
Yeah, but I ended up paying a lot more than that because if I take out a loan, I probably am
Yeah.
spending an extra year of payments to pay the interest on the money. So everybody, I get where they make money on that. That money comes out of my pocket, but with issues like COVID or issues like these other things, that it's very little comes out of the consumer's pocket. But somebody's making big money.
There, well, let me answer that with this wonderful statement. To give people who aren't familiar too much with how corrupt the federal government is, I think the tally was made in the early 2000s. The war on poverty, which started in 1964, by that point had spent $26 trillion on the war on poverty, and lo and behold, we still have poverty. So what that proved is that money doesn't cure poverty. All right, why doesn't it? It doesn't because God knows how much money went to NGOs,
Well,
Beltway.
I think that we know that a lot of the money in the so-called war on poverty, which was taken out of the Social Security Trust Fund, went to all of this whole cottage industry of social workers and social scientists who were there to handle poverty and who were basically had incentives to not solve the problem.
Yeah,
because,
poverty camps.
Yeah, I mean, the more cases they could show, the more money they get. It's
Well,
kind of
okay, but by the same token, healthcare, which costs a lot more than anti-poverty, has all sorts of parasitic organizations connected to it. And
I mean, isn't this an example? I mean, even like we look at Nixon launched the so-called war on cancer, right? One of the first thing they did, one of the first things they did was, and not to get into a topic here that I could get banned for, but they got rid of Laetrile, right? Which is basically the inside of a peach pit, and which has proven to help cancer, cure cancers. I think that's now being admitted that these things, have a benefit. I don't know if they cure cancer, but they have a benefit in terms of managing it. But the drug companies couldn't make a buck on that.
Yeah.
So they got rid of it and they denounced it and they had it. It's not totally off the market, but it's been vilified. It's sort of like what they did more recently with I shouldn't say this because I'm on YouTube today, but hydroxy, you know what, and Ivor, you know what. Right now, 3 years later, the medical journals are acknowledging that these things are standard treatment for viruses, and probably had they been promoted, they would have saved a lot of lives, and they would have reduced the involvement of COVID, which was a real thing. And by the way, this is probably one of the few issues that I do blame Donald Trump for as president. I think he could have done a better job of standing up for those things. I think he was listening too much to Fauci and Birx and this whole rotten establishment around him. So I do hold that against him. But the point is that those drugs, long ago FDA approved, the long standard record of reducing virus and his treatment of virus if it's taken early, they were denounced. I mean, there's a perverse incentive to perpetrate these diseases. I don't know if it's a financial thing. Probably is all of it. It's financial. They're making money on it.
It's financial. But what supports
a social agenda?
What supports it, unfortunately, is that the entire medical establishment, and not really by their own fault, okay? The entire medical establishment is very weak, all right? If you apply to med school, and this goes back to before I was even involved with it, going back to even the early 60s, they wanted people that were kissy-assy A students, never asked any questions, never caused any trouble, because it was quite profitable for the medical industry and the journals and everything else to be controlled by big pharma, all right? And what they did was create this, I mean, it's not a false history, but it's a stupid history where they would, cling to certain triumphs, whether Jonas Salk, which is legitimate, and Sabin,
right,
and Francis Kelsey with thalidomide and whatnot, and they keep hammering that so that you just can't question the establishment. So when RFK Jr. and others started questioning the COVID vaccine,
Mhm.
and he wasn't the only one, and he wasn't even the first.
No, we know those great doctors who questioned it. These were amongst America's most respected medical people. I mean, right? Dr. Robert Malone, Dr. Peter McCullough, they were on the top of their field. I mean, they had everything to lose by doing this, and they were knocked off out of their field. They did sacrifice a lot to bring it up.
Well, I mean, and what had happened was that, and this is why Fauci is so evil. All right, his career of killing people didn't start with COVID; it started with AIDS.
Oh yeah, I mean the AZT was responsible for more AIDS deaths than AIDS itself,
Yeah,
from what
and
I
and
understand.
and I and what happened was, if you want to get conspiratorial, I want to know why Corey Mullis, who was the most outspoken critic of Tony Fauci, suddenly and very quietly just died before
Very,
COVID.
very suspicious. And he was a Nobel Prize winning scientist who I think invented the test kit for that would later be used to
Yeah,
test
well, he was the guy that came up with PCR,
PCR.
polymerase chain reaction, which, among other things, is what really, if you will, launched forensic science. Because back in the day, the only way DNA would be useful is if you had, 3 gallons of blood at the crime scene necessary to extract the DNA. He figured out how to amplify DNA from small quantities. He
Right.
always hated Fauci. He was very public in his condemnation of Fauci. Most famously, during AIDS, there was an AIDS conference, and this is sort of well known, but not kind of well taught.
Hmm.
There was a conference where Corey Mullis and others came up with 5,300 documented cases of AIDS, of which the patient did not have HIV. All right.
Okay.
And as far as Fauci went with that was, well, guys, we'll call that idiopathic, which means no known cause, AIDS. Boom. That's it. Done. Because it's pretty clear that HIV doesn't cause AIDS, certainly not by itself. But
Right.
that was the flavor of the month at the time. And there was money to be made. How AZT got involved with that. Here's a failed cancer drug that apparently had some very limited properties that they were using to treat AIDS. It killed the patients. So the point is that it's a matter of money. It's a matter of false gods too, because let's just say, I mean, it's like the judiciary. The good ones, as a rule, don't want to be judges. I mean, think about it, Chuck. You could be 100% mediocre lawyer like a Mark Elias, and you pay tons of money
Yeah.
practicing law. Why would you want to be a judge?
Oh, by the way, I would say Mark Elias is a very brilliant lawyer. Evil, but brilliant.
He doesn't do the work.
That may be, but
He has a bunch of associates who are true believing liberals.
no, but he can't be underestimated. He's very good at what he does. He's evil.
His organization, but
Yeah.
he personally is a mediocre lawyer at best.
Probably, yeah. Probably, yeah.
But I guess the point of that was that he doesn't want to be an academic in a law school. He's just going to make a lot of money. He billed out $650,000 just for, what was it, week and a half, 2-week attempted recount in the Pennsylvania Senate race.
Oh my God, yeah, and not to mention the fact that I think they all got rich off of the Cackles campaign, right?
Yeah.
They shelled out over $1 billion into who knows who. Consultants became multimillionaires overnight. But by the way, just for the record, I should note, I've just been shut down on TikTok. I don't know what something you said, Mike.
Something I said. All right.
I think it might have been the business of of Mullis, or there was some trigger that led them to shut off the stream.
Well, you know, it's interesting. Who the heck is listening that carefully to this?
There are people. No, I had people when you go on TikTok, people pick it up. I mean, I have about 8,000 followers now, even though I've been shadow banned.
Well,
And
what I think happens and
there's
this
people
illustrates
keeping tabs on me on TikTok.
what illustrates my point here
Yeah.
is that people generally in an atheist society like we have worship authority. And believe me, I have been attacked mercilessly on various forums for trying to tell the truth about Tony Fauci.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Well, that's taboo. I mean, and now of course there's rumors that this corrupt, illegitimate regime is going to issue some kind of a retroactive pardon for Fauci before they leave. But you touched on something that gets into the second conspiracy theory around Brian Thompson, the insurance man. And I'm not going to be articulate about this. I'll be general, but generally speaking, they were under investigation by the Federal Trade Commission for antitrust activities.
Yeah.
There was rumors that there had been insider trading in that Thompson and several other figures who are these people are super rich. They had been alerted in advance that they were under investigation, which they then took that information and sold all their stock, pocketing tens of millions of dollars and basically screwing over the shareholders and their own employees in the process. And that this case was coming up for hearings, and that Thompson, rumor has it, was planning on spilling the beans on a bunch of things in order to save his own hide. And he was in a position, he was one of the top figures in the insurance industry who probably knew everything about everyone.
Yeah.
And including, apparently, not to mention names, but Nancy Pelosi and her husband, who apparently made a few bucks on that deal as well, and some other people in Congress. So there may have been an incentive to knock him off. I'm not saying I know anything about this. I don't. But that is one of the theories that's out there. It all looks a little too neat, and in terms of the timing. When you have a situation like this, you have to look at the timing.
Well, of course, there's got to be intel involved saying that this guy is going to be here at this time.
Yeah, and you have to take a look at who benefits.
Yeah,
Who benefited from this?
Who? Somebody. So this Mangione guy had to get that information from somebody.
Right.
Nobody knows this guy's personal schedule.
No.
So,
and he strikes me as the classic patsy, right? Like Lee Harvey Oswald. It's like I was talking about this the other day with as a guest, that there's this historic medieval group called the Hashishim, the assassins that were operating out of Islamic Persia, who would do this thing where they would, I don't want to use the word brainwash, but they would find some young, disaffected, disillusioned man in a community, in a village somewhere, usually poor and just kind of aimless. They would whisk him up to this palace in the mountains of Persia, where he would be indulged with everything you can imagine. He would have everything in his, every kind of like vice, and he'd live this enormously luxurious experience. And then and not to mention a lot of hash and a lot of drugs. That's where the word hashish comes from, the hashish. And also it's where the word assassin comes from, the hashishim. These are all come from this cult. Then after living that wonderful life for about 3 weeks and thinking he's in some kind of a nirvana or some kind of an Islamic heaven, and actually being told that he had passed away and that he was in heaven, they then send him back to his village with the job of taking someone out. You have to kill this person. And when you do, they're essence, their soul, is going to enter your body, and you were then going to fly up and have eternal joys of everything. You'll live this life with the 70 virgins and all of that. And then they send him out and he commits the assassination. Now, there's obviously more modern versions of this. I would note that another example of this, I think, is, and I've studied this a little bit, not too deeply, but enough, would be Sirhan, who
Yes,
assassinated
I was
Robert
going
F.
to mention
Kennedy.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he's been interviewed. I think that RFK Jr. believes him. He's the longest held man in American prison, and he does not remember what happened. It was almost like he had been tampered with mentally. The night before the assassination, he was having at a party with people who were involved with Charlie Manson, okay, who was another one who was part of maybe this sort of, I don't want to use, say CIA, because I don't know, but there was this kind of mind control thing going on there. And he said that there was some kind of a trigger. He was at the hotel, and there was like a sound that went off, or he saw this woman in a red dress, and there was something happened, and then he felt like he'd passed out. And then before he knows it, he's awake and he has the gun. And I think that there's a lot of people, who've interviewed him over the years, who believe this story, that he really didn't know what was going on. Another example is this guy who shot up the gay nightclub in Orlando, Mateen.
Yeah.
I actually wrote a short book about this for my college. We had to pick, like, in my criminology class, we were given a list of people that we had to do a dive into and study, and I picked him. And I discovered that he had been on several trips to Saudi Arabia. He was one of these disaffected guys, kind of an in the closet kind of a guy. And I think there's evidence that he came back from one of these trips and he was very different, according to people who knew him. It was like his brain he'd been tampered with. And that his experience of doing this shooting was one where he didn't know what he was doing. It was almost like he was under some kind of, hypnosis. So that,
Well, the famous term MK Ultra was raised
yeah,
after the Mangione thing. And as I predict, you can hold me to it, you're not going to find out a damn thing about this.
no,
Other than, physically he did it. They're going to tie him with the evidence to the crime. But, I mean, it would have been very clever if this Hashim organization, so to speak,
the
recruits
Hashishim.
some guy that has a vague connection to this insurance company by the fact that his mother was denied benefits or whatever it is, and he's groomed to be the assassin.
Well, that's the theory. And like, the Israelis have found that some of these guys who will show up in a pizza parlor with bomb belts and pull the trigger, some of them, like, were caught in advance and they were stopped, and they were interviewed, and they said, look, it's almost like I didn't know what I was doing. Now that I'm awake, I do know, and I'm sorry that I was doing this. I didn't mean to do it, but there was something going on. It's sort of, a modern version of the Hashishim. I mean, our intelligence apparatus, I mean, what Michael J. Glennon calls the double government, they, they've studied and they've gone deeply into psychological conditioning on a mass scale. And I think the master at that, and the one they emulate, is Hitler. But also on the individual scale, by using psychotropic drugs and by using other means to get people to do things that they want to do. And there's a certain type of personality that they seek out who might be vulnerable to that. People like
Hitler and Goebbels claimed that they got it from us. So I don't really know.
I don't know either, but it's been around. The British are involved with the Tavistock Institute, and certainly the Soviet Union was involved with the Polytechnic Institute.
Yeah.
And the Israelis are involved, certainly, with Mossad. I mean, this isn't new. They all interact with each other, and they all while they all have their own agendas, I think they share information about how to do these things and how to conduct these sorts of operations. So maybe there was someone, and again, I'm not saying I know anything, because obviously all I know is what I read in the paper. But but there might have been someone on the inside, what Michael J. Glennon would call a Trumanite, who wanted to take out Brian Thompson, I mean, from the insurance. There was an incentive to do this, and so they had this.
Well, I will tell you this because I've heard this from people that you wouldn't suspect. Let's just say Brian Thompson is not being heavily mourned. All right.
No, I mean, I mean, we talked about that. I mean, he's screwing people left and right. There were a lot of people who were angry, and plus the amount of money he was making, that's just greed. Why? You think that he was getting, his salary was almost $10 million a year. I mean, the guy's living in Minnesota. There's pictures of him with his yacht on a lake with his beautiful wife and two beautiful young sons and this magnificent mansion. Did he need more money? Why was he doing an insider trading deals until he could make more? I mean, that's another question. Why do people get? I mean, I would have been very happy. I mean, most, I mean, having a 20th of what he had.
I've met some people like that, and it becomes sort of a numbers game because a lot of them that I've known don't even really spend it. It's just like, what did you score?
Well, what do you do with it? I don't think he was. But the point is that to make him do stuff like that's corrupt on top of, why would he even risk it? But even so, I mean, hasn't he $10 million a year, and he's going to now stiff his own shareholders and his own employees by doing this insider deal and walking away while everybody else is screwed because the stock plummets and people lose all of their pensions, and their elderly people lose their. I mean, it's just the greed of it is astonishing. I mean,
well, there's not a lot of morality at that level, and,
right.
You just have to kind of leave it at that. I mean, you don't. Most people in business, including me, are happy when they have positive cash flow,
right,
and happy when they make a profit. I've never been in a business where I made obscene amounts of money, so I've never had that experience. But I can see. All right, I knew one guy that had kind of a windfall. He was an engineer that had a contraption for lowering the amount of noise put out by jets. And when these regulations came true, this guy became an instonaire, right? Suddenly has hundreds of millions of dollars.
right.
So what's the first thing he does? He divorces his wife and
Picks up a younger woman, right?
yeah. And of course, she gets a big piece of that anyway. I won't go into all her problems, but it was it. Some people think that, well, I've been denied and now I deserve it and it's my time. And
yeah, but at least he earned it fair and square. He invented something and it took off. It's like,
I'm saying he got a little strange.
Okay.
And,
I mean, I don't begrudge someone, like I wouldn't begrudge like a baseball player who is making what he makes, or I wouldn't begrudge a talk show host or a musician who makes what they make. It's obscene, but they're making it because that's what the market will bear. They're doing it honestly. That's in the case of Thompson, though, he was not doing it honestly. I mean, he was in that he was getting, like more money per year than an obscene amount of money, but that's the way it is. I mean, that was in the open, and his company decided to do that. Now, I think should be some regulation around that, but even so, that is one thing. But the other thing is, on top of this, he has to do this deal that was causing, investigation. I mean, why? It's just, I mean, I suppose it's the same question of, like, I don't know, it makes me think, I don't know why. It's a different subject. But it makes me think of Bill Clinton.
Yeah.
He had to have sex in public with a woman on the steps of the state capitol. Wasn't it enough, to, be having an extramarital affair, but he was like the thrill of it, I suppose. He enjoyed, you going to the church and waving a Bible in people's face, and then going back and having various assignations with Monica Lewinsky in the Oval Office.
Well, he got a perverse pleasure for publicly doing stuff that was wrong.
Right. Because it gave him a sense of power. Like,
and daring people to call him on it. I mean, he purposely misquoted one of the Beatitudes when he said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will inherit the earth." The correct quote is, "Blessed are the peacemakers because they will be called children of God." All right, not a big deal, but he did it because he knew that the sycophant media wouldn't call him on it.
Right, and he enjoyed that, and he had nothing but contempt for them.
Yeah.
And he was like, like kind of sticking it to them all. And hey, even in his book, which was 1,000 pages of absolute drivel and dull crap, he says in one sentence, he acknowledges with regard to, he talks about Lewinsky only, but he says, "I did it because I can."
Yeah.
That was his explanation. He left it at that. "I did it because I can." This kind of arrogance and this sort of, sticking it in the eye of the very establishment that created him and that he served so servilely, right? I mean, it's I don't know how I equate that with Brian Thompson. I mean, I don't think his kind of corruption is different.
Well, you get to the point where you do a little chiseling and a little more chiseling and a lot more chiseling.
Before you know it, you're attending parties with P. Diddy before you know it.
Yeah. That becomes your modus operandi. All right. And this is why he is not heavily mourned.
No.
And and then there are people trying to make you feel bad for the fact that he was killed. I mean, I don't know how innocent he was. I don't think he was that innocent.
No, he
It's
was I don't think anyone has any sympathy for him. Although, I don't think anybody deserves to be gunned down like that.
Yeah.
There's something about it that it would have at least been decent if he was able to face the guy, eyeball to eyeball before getting gunned down. I mean, but the doing it that way was not the American way. It's not like the old West, the model with Wyatt Earp. You meet somebody at high noon at the OK Corral, then you see who gets to pull the gun first. It's not like a, John Wayne or some, the movies. It was not really done that way. And that's wrong. I mean, the whole thing is wrong. I don't think anybody deserves to be assassinated. But, he's not a sympathetic figure.
No.
And this other guy seems, as I said, like some kind of a patsy. I don't know, showing up at a McDonald's and, he's identified by an employee and the police come and he's got everything there. He's got his fake IDs. He's got the gun. He's got everything sitting there. It's just a little too neat. There's something about it that's
the whole McDonald's thing was a little weird.
It just doesn't add up. I don't think we'll ever get to the bottom of it.
No.
And of course, it's going to be a sensation on trial because he's quite good looking, and women are going to. I mean, he's like the Menendez brothers, right?
Yeah, there we go.
I mean, with all due respect, I remember my late grandmother said, "I can't stop watching the Iran-Contra hearings because Oliver North is so handsome." It's like there's going to be that going on. Right? I mean, unfortunately, maybe that says something about women. I don't know. I mean, I'm not trying to cast aspersions here, but it's going to be a show. It's going to be like it'll be like Hollywood, and that's why all the media was covering.
Oh, it's already starting up. His defense attorney said, "I don't know of any evidence they've got against him." Really? All the stuff they got. Okay, so. But
I've seen images of him on TikTok where he's dressed like a Catholic saint, and
Yeah.
with holding like a heart. He looks like almost like Jesus. So there is this going on, and that's not good. That's not healthy. There's something about that it's a snapshot of our society, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, there's going to be some tumultuous times here as we readjust back to a Trump situation. There
Thank
are
God.
people in the establishment that are really scared of what's going to come down.
Oh yeah, and by the way, all of Trump's nominees are going to be approved.
Yeah.
They've got 53 Republicans. Even if they lose like Murkowski and some of these rhinos, they still have enough. Between 53, they've got 3 extras, plus they got a tiebreaker which makes it 4. They're going to get them approved, and there was just another hoax or another smear job attempted against Hexeth. I don't know if you saw this, but the media was about, big establishment magazine was about to go out with the latest. They were going to claim that he never really was accepted at West Point. And somebody on the inside at West Point was working to make sure that he was like, information about that was taken out. But Hexeth fortunately saved his receipts. He had the letter of acceptance. He had the documents which showed that he was accepted at West Point. He chose not to go. Instead, he went to Princeton. But he had it. He put it. He posted it. He brought it up, and they canceled the story. And and West Point changed the record back. So, you have to be careful. I mean, they're going after these people and they're failing. It's not going to happen. All of them are going to be approved, and it's very exciting. Trump is going to hit the ground running.
Looks good.
Yeah.
I think 2025, we're going to have more positive attitude shows than maybe we did before the election. You seem to be a changed man.
Yes. I mean, I feel very hopeful. I really do. And I was, they're into the same old crap. I was listening on the way over here to do the show to NPR because I want to see what the other side's saying. And they were interviewing, you can guess, none other than McCabe, right? Lied to Congress something like 20 times.
Yeah.
Never charged, disgraced, part of the FISA fake dossier case against Trump, the Russia. And he's just spouting the same old garbage. I mean, it's just not working for them. Oh, Trump tried to, was trying to assert power, and he was like trying to overthrow the election results. And nobody believes that anymore.
And like I said before the election, they don't have any talent. They're pulling out the same crap that maybe worked for them 20 years ago.
Right.
But
it's not. It's already been rejected by the American people.
Yeah.
It's not. Nobody believes that stuff anymore, and yet it's like they're a broken record. And
so now McCabe is forced to do the circuit of these NPR people. Great, good for him.
While they're drinking the same old Kool-Aid that they've been into, and it's not. I don't even think that I don't even think the host was buying it. It's like you could just tell.
Yeah.
I having been a talk show host, I can hear things. Yeah. Because I'm sort of tuned into what people are really thinking, and they're not even buying this anymore. It's just it's over for them, and hopefully he might be held legally, called down to the carpet for first of all for lying to Congress. I mean, Steve Bannon and Peter Navarro went to prison for a lot less.
Oh yeah,
than what he did. I mean, they just refused to testify to this phony committee. That all of those people should be held accountable, especially Liz Cheney. God, I mean, the worst. Stealing, the
she's really begging for a pardon now.
She's going to need a pardon because she's in trouble, and she should be.
Yeah, destroying evidence of federal investigation. Yeah.
They destroyed everything before the Republicans took over, and they don't. It's like the whole thing was illegitimate from the beginning, and even even Speaker Johnson has said that publicly, that they should reconstitute a legitimate committee and actually look into all of this stuff. I hope they appoint Matt Gaetz as a special prosecutor to look into like the 2020 election for starters. Maybe that might be asking too much, but we'll see. You know,
Yeah, it's going to be interesting.
they should, because they need to get to the bottom of that once and for all. After all these years of gaslighting and attacking anybody and who questioned that election as almost being like a subhuman, it would be a beautiful thing to see them get into it. But that might be too much to ask. I'm happy that Trump's been elected.
You have to ask.
And
I mean, Bill Clinton is asking for a pardon for Hillary.
oh, really?
So yeah,
They're going to need they want all these rotten criminals, Hillary, Fauci, the whole stinking Schiff. They'll all get this blanket pardon before Biden leaves office. It's going to destroy whatever's left of that awful party. I don't think any American is going to buy that. You know, it's just it's just an ugly, sickening, and pathetic way for this illegitimate regime to go down the tubes. Anyways, so Mike, what do you have coming up on the Substack?
Well, I was going to try to do a few more articles before the end of the year. Fortunately, we've been busy in my other business, and just trying to keep up. But and I feel kind of embarrassed because there are people that they make a living on Substack, but they're writing all the time. Mine is free, so whatever I put out is there when it is.
Well, you do it as a passion. I mean, it's not necessarily
it's right. It's a passion project.
Yeah.
Other things going on, house hunting in a crummy market and all this sort of thing. But
okay, good.
This is what we do, and it's always a highlight talking to you, especially now that you're this positive individual.
I know. I don't know what to do with myself after 4 years of like, it's like it's almost like you have to shift gears.
Well, it's a good shift, though.
It is. I'm believe me, I'm grateful, and I feel very excited as we enter into the Christmas season, and it's just a beautiful time, and it's beautiful to watch these criminals scurrying around. And thank God Kash Patel is going to be there. Yeah. What a great guy! He's going to clean out that rat's nest at the FBI. He really is. And so these are all great. Pam Bondi, she's fine. Yeah. These people, every one of them is excellent. A couple of bad ones, but so be it. But the important ones are in place, and they're ready to go. So anyway, Mike, but so I'll talk to you next week, and be well.
You too.